The experiment. The empire of the Vayari was built not with ships of steel alone, but with the mind control ray that made resistance meaningless across the galaxy. For centuries, their rule stretched over countless worlds, and each conquest was the same. They would descend in their silver ships, activate the ray, and watch as entire populations collapsed into obedience. It was elegant, it was simple, and it was absolute. Every species they encountered bent the knee, their free will shattered in an instant. The ray had been tested on thousands of alien minds, each wired differently, each shaped by evolution on hostile or gentle worlds, and all of them eventually surrendered. To the Vayari, free thought was no more than an obstacle to be erased, and they believed there was no creature in the galaxy capable of resisting them. The Central Council of the Vayari declared that it was time to expand into the Sol system. They had heard whispers of Earth, a small blue planet on the edge of known space, rich in resources and strategically placed between several important trade routes. The intelligence reports were limited but suggested the dominant species, the humans, were aggressive, adaptable, and unpredictable. The Council dismissed those reports as exaggeration. Aggression meant nothing in the face of the ray. Adaptability was meaningless when the mind could be silenced with a pulse of energy. The Council voted unanimously that Earth would fall within a day of contact. Inside the command ship, Vayari officers prepared the device. The ray had never failed before. They adjusted the amplification coils, calibrated the psychic resonators, and charged the emitters with the confidence of a species that had not known failure for generations. The fleet moved silently through the void, until Earth appeared on their displays. Blue oceans shimmering against the black of space. Continents, marked with clusters of light showing a thriving civilization below. Commander Threx stood at the center of the control chamber. His voice carried calm authority as he gave the order. The weapon master pressed his hand to the console and the ray pulsed outward, a wave of invisible energy sweeping across the planet. The crew expected to see their usual readings, sudden, compliance signals flooding their monitors, broadcast disrupted by commands to obey, and panic followed by silence. Instead, nothing happened. The humans below continued their routines as if nothing had touched them. Planes still flew, cities still buzzed with life, and transmissions still filled the spectrum. The readouts showed resistance levels beyond any scale they had ever recorded. Confusion rippled through the chamber. Technicians checked for malfunctions, recalibrated instruments, and reran diagnostics. The weapon master insisted the ray was functioning perfectly. The commander frowned, unable to comprehend what his eyes told him. Never before had the ray failed. He ordered a second pulse, stronger and more concentrated. Again the wave rolled over Earth. Again nothing happened. The humans carried on, unaware of the invisible storm that had tried to bind their minds. Panic began to gnaw at the edges of the crew's composure. Some whispered that the humans possessed shielding technology, but the scans showed no such defenses. Others suggested the humans were pretending, but that too made no sense, for no species had ever been able to resist the initial strike. Commander Threx silenced them and ordered a focused test. A small village on the edge of a forest was chosen. The ray was targeted with precision, directed at a handful of human individuals. The pulse surged. The humans blinked, scratched their heads, and then went about their business as if nothing unusual had happened. For the first time in centuries, the Vayari felt fear. If their weapon could not bend these creatures, then conquest was no longer certain. Their entire empire rested on the illusion of invincibility, and this single world now threatened to shatter it. Threx ordered silence on the communication channels. No word of this failure could spread beyond the fleet until they understood what they faced. Yet even as he gave the command, he felt the weight of something he had never experienced before. Doubt. Far below on Earth, humanity remained unaware that a galactic empire had just attempted to enslave them. The morning sun rose over cities and fields. Children laughed on their way to school and workers rushed through crowded streets. But unseen eyes watched them from orbit, eyes filled with growing unease. The Vayari had unleashed their most trusted weapon and discovered that, for the first time in their long history, it was useless. The commander stared at the blue planet with narrowed eyes. He knew the council would demand answers, and he knew failure was not a word they tolerated. Yet deep in his mind, a question echoed louder than any order. What kind of species could shrug off the greatest weapon the galaxy had ever known? First contact. The failure of the ray left the Vayari crew restless. They gathered in the dim light of the command chamber, each officer exchanging uneasy glances, as Commander Threx paced in silence. The technicians swore again and again that the ray was at full power, its emitters perfect, its reach flawless. Yet the humans had gone untouched, living their lives below as if nothing had struck them. The commander had crushed rebellions with a single pulse in the past. Whole cities had fallen into a quiet march of obedience. Here, however, not a single human had twitched in submission. Threx ordered a third test. This time the energy was focused, on a human military installation. The ray surged like a storm of thought, invisible tendrils meant to unravel the will of soldiers. Monitors flickered with the familiar signatures of the weapon, but once again the readings returned empty of effect. The soldiers below continued their drills, their planes still launched and their radios still buzzed with ordinary chatter. The commander's jaw tightened as he realized the truth. The weapon was useless on this world. Among the officers, fear slowly turned into anger. One argued that perhaps the humans were not worth the effort. Another hissed that abandoning the mission would invite shame and suspicion from the council. Threx silenced them with a growl, his eyes burning. He had seen the humans in reports, a species that had risen from primitive hunters to masters of industry in only a few thousand years, a blink in galactic time. They were violent, creative, and stubborn. If the Empire could not control them now, then the humans might one day become a threat greater than any the Vayari had known. The commander made his decision. They would not retreat. They would make contact orders swept through the ship. A landing craft was prepared and cloaked in the haze of the upper atmosphere. Inside, a small team of Vayari soldiers readied their weapons. Their task was simple: capture a few humans alive and test the ray directly at close range. If it worked face to face, then perhaps the Empire could still bend Earth into submission. If not, then answers had to be found before the Council grew impatient. The landing craft descended under the cover of night, slipping silently over dark forests and quiet fields. It settled near a remote town, where lights glowed in scattered houses and vehicles rumbled down narrow roads. The soldiers stepped onto the soil of Earth for the first time, their armor glistening with alien alloys, their weapons humming with suppressed power. They moved swiftly through the shadows until they came upon a human figure walking along a path. A young man with a backpack listening to music, unaware of the hunters closing in. The Vayari soldier activated a handheld version of the ray and aimed it at the human. Energy burst forth, invisible yet powerful. The man stopped walking, paused for a moment, and then frowned as if annoyed by an insect. He shook his head, tugged at the earbuds in his ears, and muttered something before continuing down the road. The soldier froze in disbelief. The device had worked perfectly on every other being across 100 conquered planets, yet here it was no more effective than a whisper in the wind. They tried again with another human, then another. The results were the same. Confusion, a brief pause, and then nothing. Humans resisted every attempt without even realizing they were under attack. The soldiers returned to the craft with dread in their hearts. They had not captured subjects. They had only confirmed the nightmare. When they reported to Threx, the commander felt the weight of destiny pressing down on him. This was no mere malfunction. Humanity was immune. The Empire's greatest weapon, the tool of their endless dominance, had been rendered powerless by a species that still walked on the edge of their own history. Threx knew what this meant. If the humans could not be controlled, then they could only be fought, and if they could be fought, then the galaxy might one day look to them for freedom rather than chains. On Earth, a few observant scientists noticed strange disruptions in the radio spectrum, faint pulses of energy with no natural explanation. They logged the data, puzzled but intrigued, unaware that it was evidence of an empire trying and failing to enslave them. Military satellites picked up unusual patterns too, though no one yet realized the danger orbiting above their world. Humanity was still blind to the storm that was gathering, but the first ripples of awareness had begun. Commander Threx stood before the viewport of the command ship, staring at the planet below. His claws tapped against the railing as he whispered to himself. The Council would demand results, and he would have none. He knew their wrath would fall, heavy, but he also knew retreat was impossible. For the first time in countless years, the Empire had encountered something beyond its control. Humanity was more than a target now. They were a mystery, a threat, and perhaps the undoing of everything the Vayari had built. The failure deepens. The days that followed grew heavier for the Vayari fleet. Commander Threx gathered his officers in the council chamber of the flagship, where dim lights flickered across polished metal walls. His gaze was hard and his voice sharp as he demanded answers. The mind control ray had been their weapon of absolute rule, yet against the humans it was nothing. The technicians spoke with shaking voices that the ray was operating at full strength. There was no flaw in the design. The humans themselves were the flaw in the equation because their minds could not be bent. Threx did not want to believe it, but every test returned the same result. The soldiers who had touched the soil of Earth carried back more than reports. They carried the weight of failure. Each one spoke of how the humans looked directly at them, without fear, not even knowing they were the target of a weapon that had enslaved billions elsewhere. To the Vayari, this was madness. No species could resist forever. Yet humans did so with the ease of breathing. Whispers spread across the ship, whispers that perhaps the humans were not an ordinary species at all. Some feared they were a curse, placed upon the galaxy. Others believed their strange resilience meant they were destined for power. Whatever the truth, none could deny that humanity stood apart. Meanwhile on Earth, a ripple of unease began to stir. Military listening posts picked up repeating energy patterns sweeping across the atmosphere. At first they thought it was interference or natural background noise, but the patterns were too precise, too deliberate. Scientists at observatories detected brief shifts in radio frequencies and unusual static across communication bands. Something unnatural was moving above them, though no one could see it. Rumors began to circulate quietly among defense agencies that an unknown force was probing the planet. The Vayari continued their experiments. They built new amplifiers on board the ship, concentrating the power of the ray into tighter beams. They targeted political leaders, scientists, even small groups of civilians. Each time the ray fired, the readings came back unchanged. The humans resisted without effort. Some rubbed their temples as if feeling a faint pressure. Others grew distracted, for a heartbeat, but not a single one succumbed. Frustration turned into desperation. The Empire had never known such humiliation, and the crew felt the weight of disgrace settling like chains around their necks. Commander Threx spent long hours staring at the data. He replayed recordings of humans under the ray, slowing them down, searching for any sign of weakness. There was nothing. The humans simply continued their lives as if their will was carved in stone. Threx clenched his claws and thought of the Council. If they learned of this failure, his head would be demanded. He could not return without victory. He decided then that simple experiments were no longer enough. Direct confrontation was needed. He would force the humans to notice. He would test their resistance not just in the quiet of laboratories, but on the battlefield of fear. Unaware of the plans above, humanity inched closer to awareness. A handful of scientists pieced together the anomalies and began to wonder if they were being observed. Reports reached military high command that something large was hiding in orbit, though no satellite captured a clear image. Governments exchanged hushed messages filled with worry, but no one dared to speak openly to the public. Fear of causing panic kept the truth buried, yet beneath the surface, humanity was beginning to sense the storm. Back on the flagship, tension threatened to break discipline. Officers quarreled in private, some demanding withdrawal to preserve their lives, others insisting that conquest must continue no matter the cost. Threx silenced dissent with threats, but he could feel the foundation cracking. For generations, the Vayari had ruled through the illusion of invulnerability. If humanity spread word that the ray was powerless, then the Empire itself might crumble as subject worlds rose in rebellion. This was more than a battle for Earth. It was a battle for the survival of Vayari supremacy. The commander's eyes fixed once more on the blue and green sphere below. The humans did not yet know what kind of storm circled above them. He felt, his chest tighten with a sensation he had not known since his youth. It was not anger and it was not pride. It was fear. Fear of what humanity might become if left free. Fear of what they might do once they learned that the greatest weapon in the galaxy had no hold over them. And deep within that fear was another thought, darker and heavier. Perhaps this species was not the anomaly. Perhaps the Vayari had only now discovered the limit of their own power. Human response. The Vayari commander knew that silence would not last forever. Every failed attempt with the mind control ray only deepened the shame pressing upon his chest. His officers spoke less now, their voices hushed in the corridors, their eyes avoiding his. The Empire's dominance had always rested upon certainty. To lose certainty here meant more than the loss of one world. It meant the unraveling of fear that had held subject species in chains for centuries. Threx decided that if the ray could not conquer Earth, then fear of force would have to do. He began preparing the fleet for intimidation strikes, demonstrations of power meant to frighten humanity into submission before the Council demanded his execution for failure. On Earth, the signs grew harder to ignore. Radar networks detected echoes of objects that could not be explained by natural debris. Communication satellites reported bursts of interference at regular intervals. A handful of astronomers caught faint glimmers of metallic shapes moving against the stars. Reports filtered slowly through governments, each one denied in public but studied in secret. Leaders of nations gathered in secure meetings, voices heavy with tension, as they realized they were not alone. Someone was out there, and whoever they were had already reached Earth without warning. Scientists pored over the strange signals that had washed across the atmosphere in recent weeks. The patterns were too structured to be natural. Some thought it was a new weapon. Others suspected attempts at communication. But the possibility that it was a hostile intrusion rose higher each day. One research team in Europe compared the data with theoretical models of neural disruption and came to a startling conclusion. The signals bore resemblance to brainwave manipulation experiments once studied decades earlier. If true, then someone was trying to influence human thought from space. Their papers never reached the public, locked instead in classified vaults where generals debated the risk. The United Nations, often slow to act, now moved with urgency. Nations that had quarreled for years put aside rivalries and began to share information. Fleets were put on alert. Defensive satellites were retasked to scan the heavens. Fighter squadrons drilled with new orders to intercept anything descending from orbit. Humanity did not yet know the name of the enemy, but instinct told them that survival might soon depend on unity. Above in the Vayari fleet, Commander Threx watched the preparations below with growing frustration. The humans were not falling into panic. They were not breaking apart in fear. Instead, they were pulling together. The commander could feel the timeline collapsing. If humanity prepared too much, then open war would become costly, perhaps even unwinnable. Yet retreat was still unthinkable. His reputation and the Empire's illusion of control hung in the balance. He ordered the fleet to advance into low orbit, a show of force no human eye could mistake. The sudden appearance of vast alien vessels lit up the skies as telescopes and satellites caught their silhouettes. News leaked despite government attempts at secrecy. Across the planet, ordinary people looked up at the stars and saw movement where no movement should be. Fear spread quickly, but with it came defiance. Protests erupted, demanding answers from leaders. Soldiers volunteered in record numbers. A sense of determination grew that if Earth was to face an enemy from the stars, then they would not kneel quietly. Inside military bunkers, human scientists worked frantically to decode the nature of the signals. They built crude models and tested them against volunteers. The results confirmed their worst fears. The signals were indeed designed to influence brain function, but for reasons they could not explain, the human mind resisted naturally. This discovery shocked even the scientists. Humanity was immune to an attack that should have stripped away free will. It was a terrifying thought, but also a liberating one. For the first time, they understood that the invaders above were not omnipotent. They could be fought. Commander Threx received reports that human defenses were mobilizing at a speed unmatched by other species. His claws tightened against the railing as he realized what this meant. Not only were humans immune to the ray, they were also fast, coordinated, and unafraid to challenge. The Council would never forgive him if this truth reached the wider galaxy. His only option now was to crush humanity by force before they revealed the Empire's weakness to every world, under its rule. On Earth, however, something remarkable was happening. Old rivals exchanged information freely. Generals who once distrusted each other now spoke daily. Scientists from distant continents shared research without hesitation. The looming threat above forged bonds stronger than any treaty of the past. Humanity, for all its divisions, was uniting under a single silent vow. They would not surrender their minds, their freedom, or their planet. The stage was set. The Vayari would soon move from subtlety to open aggression, and humanity was ready to answer. What the aliens did not yet understand was that their greatest weapon had already failed, and without it they were about to face something far more dangerous than submission. They were about to face the will of humankind unbroken and unyielding. Clash of wills. The moment finally came when patience ended, and Commander Threx could wait no longer. The humans had not bent under the ray. They had not panicked under the shadow of the fleet, and their defenses grew stronger each day. If he delayed further, the Council would strip him of command and perhaps his life. He gathered his officers and spoke with the voice of finality. They would strike openly, not with the subtlety of the mind control ray, but with soldiers, weapons, and fire. The Empire's power would be shown through violence, and Earth would be reminded that resistance was futile. The fleet descended in waves, dark shapes blotting out the stars, engines roaring as they pierced the skies. Across the world, humans stared upward in horror as burning streaks cut through the atmosphere. Cities trembled as alien craft hovered above them. From the bellies of those craft poured troops that were not Vayari, but the enslaved soldiers of other conquered species, warriors bound to obedience by the very ray that failed against humanity. These soldiers were strong, disciplined, and merciless. They had crushed rebellions on distant worlds, and now they descended upon Earth with weapons ready. Human militaries scrambled to meet them. Fighter jets screamed into the air, missiles streaked toward descending craft, and anti-air batteries thundered. Battles erupted in the skies and on the ground as humanity faced the unknown with steel nerves and determination. What shocked the galaxy most when the first transmissions leaked beyond Earth was not that humanity fought, but how they fought. Where other species had crumbled under the combined pressure of invasion and mind control, humans resisted with a fury that startled even the Vayari commanders. In the streets of a great city, alien soldiers marched, their minds shackled to the will of the ray. But instead of bowing, humans fought back with every weapon at hand. Police officers stood shoulder to shoulder with civilians. Soldiers rallied in barricades. Engineers turned construction equipment into makeshift defenses. Firefighters carried the wounded while shouting defiance at the invaders. Every corner became a battlefield where ordinary men and women refused to yield. Commander Threx watched the battles unfold on his displays. He expected disarray, chaos, the collapse of morale, but what he saw was unity. Even when humans were outnumbered, they did not break. Even when buildings burned and streets filled with smoke, they pushed back with relentless energy. His enslaved soldiers could defeat them in single encounters, but never hold ground for long. Every victory the Vayari gained came at terrible cost, and every inch of progress was torn away by human counterattacks. In one region, a squad of alien soldiers cornered a group of humans, only to find themselves ambushed from rooftops and alleys. In another, armored vehicles belonging to the invaders rolled through a highway only to be destroyed by coordinated human artillery and daring pilots. The humans adapted with shocking speed. They learned enemy tactics within hours and countered them with creativity the Vayari had never faced before. What should have been a swift demonstration of dominance became a grinding struggle. News spread across the galaxy faster than Threx could contain it. Smuggled transmissions showed humans fighting without fear, their eyes blazing with determination. Worlds long enslaved by the Vayari began to whisper that perhaps freedom was not impossible after all. If the humans could resist the ray, then maybe they too could break free. The illusion of the Empire's absolute power cracked like glass. On Earth, the cost was terrible. Cities smoldered, lives were lost, and chaos reigned. But even in ruin, the human spirit burned brighter. Families sheltered each other, communities defended their streets, and leaders urged unity. What mattered most was not the weapons or the strategies, but the unbreakable will of a species that refused to surrender. Threx felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The Council would see this as weakness, perhaps even betrayal. Yet he could not deny the truth. The humans were not like the others. They were dangerous because they would not kneel. They did not even seem to understand the concept of submission. Every attempt to break them only forged them harder. Their chaos, their stubbornness, their unpredictability. These were not flaws, but strengths. The battle raged into the night. Skies glowed red with fire and thunder rolled from horizon to horizon. Still the humans stood. For every building lost, they built barricades. For every soldier who fell, another stepped forward. In every broadcast captured by the Vayari, one phrase echoed again and again. "We will not bow." At last, Commander Threx realized what he faced was not simply another conquest. It was the beginning of a war that could reshape the galaxy. If the humans survived this invasion, then they would rise not only as defenders of their own world, but as a beacon to every enslaved species beyond. He clenched his fists and gave the order to escalate, for if Earth could not be broken now, then the Empire itself might one day crumble. The turning point. The war had stretched longer than Commander Thrax ever intended. What was meant to be a swift, crushing blow had turned into a struggle that drained his fleet and shook his certainty. The Vayari soldiers continued to fight with their enslaved armies, yet the humans did not weaken. Instead, they seemed to grow sharper with every passing day. Their armies adapted, their scientists pushed harder, and their leaders drew strength from unity that Threx had never witnessed in any conquered species. The humans were not just surviving the storm, they were bending it to their will. Deep beneath, mountains and hidden in bunkers, human scientists worked with fragments of alien technology captured in raids. Engineers pried open devices powered by strange crystals and circuits that shimmered with unknown energy. Teams of neurologists studied the patterns of the signals that had failed to enslave them. What they found astonished them. The mind control ray was designed to align neural pathways into submission by overwhelming the brain's ability to resist. Every species encountered by the Vayari had pathways ordered enough that the signal could take hold. But human brains were different. They were chaotic, endlessly shifting, filled with unpredictable bursts of thought and constant adaptation. The very thing that made humanity prone to conflict and disorder also shielded them from control. Their minds were storms, and no signal could cage a storm. This discovery spread quickly through human command. At first, it was a matter of pride, then of strategy. If they could understand why they resisted, they could learn how to turn the weapon back on the enemy. Scientists began to reshape the captured devices, feeding them with human data, twisting the frequencies to disrupt the hold the Vayari had on their enslaved soldiers. It was risky and crude, but it was their best hope. The first test came on a battlefield scarred with smoke and ash. Human forces faced a squad of alien soldiers whose minds were shackled by the ray. As bullets and plasma fire raged, a device was activated from the back of a truck. A pulse rolled out, not aimed at humans, but at the soldiers bound by the Vayari. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the aliens staggered, their weapons lowering, their eyes clearing. Confusion spread through them as they looked around with newfound freedom. One soldier cried out in his native tongue, realizing his mind was his own again. The human commanders knew then that the experiment had worked. They had found a way not only to resist the ray, but to shatter its grip on others. Word of this breakthrough spread among the human ranks like fire in dry grass. It changed everything. No longer was the fight only about survival. Now it was about liberation. Each captured device was converted. Each battlefield became a chance to free more soldiers. As alien troops fell under the pulses and awoke from their chains, they turned their fury against the Vayari, who had enslaved them. Entire squads defected in battle, fighting shoulder to shoulder with humans against their former masters. Commander Threx watched in horror as his greatest strength collapsed before his eyes. The armies he had relied upon for centuries were slipping from his grasp. The illusion of total control was breaking not in whispers but in the roar of freed voices shouting defiance. Threx tried to rally his fleet, but fear was spreading faster than discipline. Reports came in from across the occupied zones. Soldiers once enslaved had abandoned their posts, some even rising in revolt against the Ve'ari officers. On Earth, the tide of war shifted. For the first time, humanity held more than stubborn resistance. They held momentum. Cities that had burned began to push the invaders back. Streets once filled with despair now echoed with chants of freedom. Human and alien stood together against the Ve'ari, their alliance forged in shared defiance. The Council of the Empire sent messages demanding results, their anger clear in every word. But Threx could not deliver victory. He could only watch as the humans turned his weapon into their shield. Each defeat cut deeper into the myth of Ve'ari dominance. Each human victory echoed louder across the galaxy. For species chained in distant systems, the message was clear. The Ray was not invincible. The Ve'ari were not gods. There was hope. In the command chamber, Threx felt the shadow of doom creeping closer. He had underestimated humanity, and now the Empire itself might pay the price. Yet part of him still wondered. How had this species, small and new to the stars, become the one thing that could unravel centuries of control? He stared again at the blue planet below and whispered a truth that chilled his officers. If humans could not be controlled, then they could never be conquered. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. The galaxy was watching. Humanity had risen from prey to predator, from target to liberator. The Ve'ari had unleashed their most powerful weapon and discovered instead their greatest weakness. The storm of human will was spreading, and nothing would ever be the same again. Humanity strikes back. The Ve'ari Empire had grown arrogant over centuries, convinced that control was absolute and no force could rise against them. Every system under their grasp had bowed. Every species enslaved, every rebellion crushed before it could breathe. Yet Earth was different. Humanity was different. The humans had not only survived the mind control ray, they had learned to weaponize it against the oppressors. Every liberated soldier became a soldier for freedom. Every victory a symbol that the Empire could falter. The humans did not hesitate. They did not wait for permission from distant councils or alien alliances. They moved like a force of nature, striking where the Ve'ari least expected, liberating worlds that had known only fear, and leaving trails of hope in their wake. On the bridge of the human flagship, Commander Arlen stood surrounded by officers and strategists who moved with precision and confidence. They had prepared for this moment for years, studying enemy tactics, predicting responses, and readying devices that could turn the Ve'ari's own weapons against them. Every pulse sent through the modified mind control rays freed soldiers from the Empire's grasp, swelling the ranks of the human-led coalition. Alien species that had once cowered now fought with renewed vigor, their chains broken, their minds unshackled, their hatred of the Ve'ari united with human determination. Arlen watched as communications from dozens of systems arrived simultaneously, reports of victories and revolts flooding in, and he felt the rush of something the galaxy had not seen in centuries. Unstoppable momentum. The Ve'ari fleet responded with fury, bombarding planets that were liberated, cutting supply lines and sending elite units to strike at the heart of human forces. But humans had already anticipated every move. Fleets moved with agility, striking swiftly, disappearing before counterattacks could be launched. Human pilots executed maneuvers that defied known physics, using unpredictability and boldness as weapons. Engineers had modified the captured Ve'ari technology to amplify shields and weapon outputs beyond what the enemy thought possible. Every battle was a lesson for the humans and a disaster for the Ve'ari. Soldiers who had once been enslaved by the Ray now fought alongside humans with fierce determination, using their knowledge of Empire tactics against them, guiding fleets through ambushes and traps, turning the Empire's strength into its weakness. In the capital world of the Ve'ari Empire, Threx watched in disbelief as the rebellion spread faster than any prediction. Entire cities were overrun, communication networks destroyed, and loyal soldiers defecting in waves that no mind control could suppress. Every strike against him felt personal, a reminder that his calculations had failed, that his arrogance had blinded him to the one species he could never dominate. Threx ordered reinforcements, hoping to crush the humans before they reached his seat of power. But even the most elite units were caught by ambushes, devices that disrupted their coordination, and the relentless push of armies that refused to yield. The humans did not show mercy because they did not need to. They showed strategy, patience, and understanding of every weakness that the Empire revealed. They freed worlds, dismantled command structures, and turned slaves into allies, and with every step, their reputation grew across the galaxy. Species that had once trembled at the name of the Ve'ari now whispered it with fear, the memory of humans and their allies pushing back against impossible odds spreading faster than the fleet could move. Finally, the decisive moment came when the human coalition reached the orbit of the Ve'ari capital. Fleets that had once been divided by species and language now moved as one unstoppable armada, a tidal wave of fury and freedom that no weapon could halt. Arlen issued the final orders, and a synchronized pulse of modified mind control rays swept across the city below. Elite guards faltered, generals collapsed under the liberation waves, and the core of the Empire shook. Threx tried to resist, tried to command, but even his mind, trained for centuries in strategy and domination, could not withstand the tide. Humanity had reached the apex of its fight, not through domination but through unity, resilience, and intelligence. When the dust settled, the capital lay silent except for the triumphant cries of liberation. Humans stood side by side with freed species, the chains of oppression shattered forever. Threx was captured, his empire in ruins, his legends of invincibility exposed as lies. Humanity had proven a truth no Ve'ari could deny. No species could control what was free and unstoppable, and no force could match the will of humans who fought, not just to survive but to protect, liberate, and endure. The galaxy had witnessed the rise of a species that refused to be enslaved, a species that turned tools of oppression into instruments of victory, and a species that would never again be underestimated. The humans did not gloat. They did not seek revenge beyond justice. They offered guidance to the liberated species, built alliances, and shared knowledge to prevent the rise of tyranny again. Earth became a beacon, a symbol, a proof that intelligence, courage, and resilience could topple the mightiest of empires. Across the stars, stories were told of humans who could not be controlled, of soldiers who fought like storms, and of leaders who saw possibility where others saw only fear. The Ve'ari Empire was broken, but the legend of humanity was only beginning, a promise written across the galaxy that freedom would always find a way, and that humans would always rise. The legacy of humans. The galaxy had never seen a species like humans, and the stories of their courage spread faster than light through star systems that had once bowed to tyrants and feared the touch of empire fleets. The liberated worlds rebuilt, their civilizations with guidance from humans who shared knowledge not to dominate, but to empower every species that had suffered under oppression. Humanity became a symbol, not only of strength, but of hope and ingenuity. And every planet that had once trembled under the Ve'ari now celebrated freedom as a gift earned by the audacity and resilience of one species that refused to bend to control. Commander Arlen stood on the bridge of the flagship as it glided through the stars. The human fleet had grown from a single ship to an armada of allies from countless worlds who now fought not for conquest, but for the preservation of liberty. The humans had shown that strategy and compassion could coexist, that power could be tempered with wisdom, and that even the most unstoppable force could be turned into a tool for liberation. The mind control rays that once enslaved millions were now used to free minds and dismantle systems of oppression, as humans taught their allies the ways of resistance. And adaptation. Threx and the remnants of his empire were held accountable not with vengeance, but with justice. The Ve'ari leaders who survived were given a choice to rebuild or to vanish from history entirely. And the galaxy watched as the humans showed that true strength lay in knowing when to strike and when to guide. The humans did not claim planets or wealth, they claimed respect and trust, and with every decision they made, the legend of humanity became a living story of hope and defiance. of limits of what any species believed possible. In every liberated city, monuments were built, not to glorify war, but to honor the courage to stand against impossible odds, to remember the moment when humans appeared, unbowed, unbroken, and unstoppable. And when children across the galaxy were taught about freedom, they learned the story of humans who had stared down mind control and tyranny, and turned fear into action and despair into inspiration. The humans themselves did not seek praise, but they could not escape it because their actions had changed the course of history, and every system now knew that the species that could not be controlled could also not be defeated. As years passed, humans continued to explore, to innovate, to build alliances with species that had once been enemies. Their fleets carried scientists, diplomats, soldiers, and teachers to distant stars, where the Vayari Empire had left scars, and they healed those wounds. With knowledge, courage, and the quiet power of example, humanity became a force that transcended war and politics, a reminder that survival was not enough, that legacy was built through courage and unity, and that the galaxy itself could be shaped by the determination of one species to be free. And so across the stars, the name of humans was whispered in reverence, not for their weapons, but for their spirit, not for their fleets, but for their will, not for their conquest, but for their unyielding refusal to be tamed. The galaxy learned that control could never chain intelligence, courage, and adaptability, that freedom was a force no empire could crush, and that humanity would forever be the species that defied every expectation and reshaped history with every decision, every battle, and every act of hope and bravery. The humans looked to the stars not for revenge, not for power, but for the endless possibilities that awaited them, knowing that they had proven what no other species had, before they had survived what should have destroyed them, defeated what should have enslaved them, and inspired what should have been forgotten. The galaxy was forever changed, and humanity had written its place among the stars with actions that would echo for millennia, and no mind control ray, no empire, and no force could ever erase the proof that humans could not be stopped. The end.